My name is Margaret Hill, and I'm 67. Picture this. You open your eyes beneath a harsh fluorescent light, your body refusing to move, your throat parched, your head swimming, and slowly it dawns on you that your own son might have slipped something into your drink, dressed you like a doll, and dragged your limp body into an insurance office to claim you were gone, all for $500,000 and a clean start somewhere far away. I never wanted to accept that thought, yet sometimes the same children you fed, sheltered, forgiven and adored with every piece of your soul can turn into strangers who meet your gaze and smile, hiding the knife meant for your back. Everything began after my hip operation. To the doctors, it was nothing special, another simple procedure on their long list, but for me it was like stepping into a fog that refused to lift. One week I was just moving a bit slower, and soon after I found myself confined to a hospital bed, surrounded by the hum of machines and quiet nurses, needing help just to sit up or smooth my hair. I felt thankful that Evan, my son, my only one, took control of everything. He brought a soft blanket from home, spoke politely to the staff, assured me that he would take care of every bank and insurance detail so I could focus on healing. He told me not to worry about a thing, and of course I trusted him. How could I not? After several days, they moved me to a small rehabilitation center outside the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was spotless and calm. My little room overlooked a tidy garden, the nurses knew my name, and a call button rested by my pillow. My days flowed quietly into each other. Tea, oatmeal, painkillers, naps. Time lost its edges and I surrendered to the rhythm, never questioning a thing. Until that night. Dinner had ended, and a nurse entered with my regular pills. She smiled, said nothing had changed, and I swallowed them as always. Yet almost at once a cold heaviness crept through me, sliding beneath my skin. My limbs turned to stone. My mind began to dissolve, the room dimming at the edges. I remember Evan sitting nearby, his hand covering mine, his voice low and careful. He whispered, "It's all right now, Mom, just rest." And then the world disappeared. I have no idea how long I was unconscious. It might have been only a few hours, or perhaps an entire day. When I finally stirred for the briefest moment, I'm certain I saw harsh lights above me. They weren't the soft golden ones from my recovery room, but the glaring white kind that hum in morgues or office ceilings. Cold, sterile, unforgiving. My head wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't come. I felt someone tug at my wrist, and through the haze I thought I caught sight of a clipboard being held above me. Then darkness swept in again. Later, I tried convincing myself it was nothing more than a strange dream, a side effect of too much medication. I told myself my imagination had blurred the edges of reality, but something deep inside whispered otherwise, that what I saw had been real, and that someone truly wanted me gone, not simply removed from their life, but erased completely. When I finally faced the truth, I didn't weep or shout. I just sat there, staring at the message glowing on my phone, as if it had been sent by some cruel imposter wearing my son's name. It couldn't have been Evan, not my boy. I searched for excuses. A misunderstanding, a wrong number, maybe blackmail. But each possibility crumbled beneath the weight of what I knew. The realization settled heavy in my chest, thick and suffocating like wet concrete. No matter how I turned it around, I couldn't deny it. My own son had declared me dead. He deceived the government, the banks, the insurance company, perhaps even his wife, forging my death to pocket $500,000 while I was still breathing under hospital sheets. And the most chilling part of all was the understanding that this wasn't impulsive. It hadn't just happened in a single night. It was crafted, carefully, patiently, planned long before I ever closed my eyes. He must have secured a falsified death certificate or something close to it. That meant paperwork, Official forms, forged signatures, stolen credentials. He knew every personal detail about me, every number and file, every drawer where I kept my documents. He could have logged into my accounts, reset passwords, redirected mail, and called the insurance company pretending to be me. Or worse, my morning son. The same child who once drifted to sleep, clutching my thumb, had now made me disappear from existence. I reached for my phone again and started dialing the bank. The first 2 numbers led to endless menus, but on the 3rd try, a real person answered. A young man with a rehearsed voice who asked for my name, account number, and date of birth. I gave him everything. There was a silence. Then he said flatly, "Ma'am, this account is marked closed. The holder is deceased." I told him that wasn't true, that I was Margaret Hill and very much alive. He hesitated, then put me on hold to connect with a supervisor. I waited so long that the bland elevator music began to scrape against my nerves. Eventually, a woman picked up. Brisk, professional, doubtful. She repeated the same questions. At first, she didn't believe me either, but I insisted. I offered to show identification over video, to send my hospital records, anything that proved I was breathing. After another drawn-out pause, her tone softened just slightly. "Mrs. Hill," she said, "we'll need to escalate this to our legal department. If a fraudulent claim has been filed, we will conduct a full investigation." Fraudulent. The word itself sent a chill through me, because this wasn't about a few forged papers or stolen forms. This was my life, my name, my home, everything that defined me, and my own son had thrown it away for cash. The following morning, I asked a nurse to help me open my email. I hadn't looked at it in weeks, maybe longer. I expected the usual spam and newsletters, but what appeared on the screen made my stomach twist. Messages from the electric company, the credit card provider, the insurance office, even my church bulletin. All marked undeliverable. Mailbox not found. Recipient deactivated. Evan had shut down my account or redirected it somewhere else. When I tried to reset the password, a message appeared saying the recovery number no longer matched. I was locked out completely. It felt as if I were being deleted piece by piece from every record I'd ever existed in. And the most horrifying part was how normal it seemed. No alerts, no questions, no one noticing that the dead woman was still breathing. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with something far deeper than physical pain. The ache came from betrayal, not from surgery. I kept seeing flashes of his life. Evan's first birthday cake, his trembling hands on the steering wheel when he got his license, the night he sobbed on the phone after his first heartbreak. I remembered being there for every single one of those moments, holding him through fevers, through job losses, through the long nights when he thought his life was falling apart. I even co-signed his first apartment lease, and when Jenna became pregnant, I bought the crib myself. I never wanted repayment, only affection, respect, maybe the occasional call to ask how I was doing. Apparently, even that was too much. The hardest truth to face wasn't that he wanted the money. It was that he wanted a future where I didn't exist at all. There was no longer any way to rationalize it as a misunderstanding. You can't accidentally forge a death certificate or redirect someone's entire financial life. This wasn't panic or poverty. It was a deliberate act. And that decision, made by my own son, cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. I needed to see the truth for myself. I needed evidence. The following morning, I asked one of the nurses if I could borrow a tablet from the recreation room. It was outdated and sluggish, but it still connected to the internet. Since I couldn't get into my own account, I went to Facebook and typed in Evan's name. His profile appeared instantly, smiling photos with Jenna and their baby girl Claire filling the screen. My hands trembled as I scrolled. He hadn't bothered to block me. He must have assumed I was gone forever. Then I saw it all. A shiny white car gleaming in his driveway with the caption, "Finally got my dream ride. Thanks, universe." Pictures from a tropical vacation followed. Palm trees, cocktails, Jenna in a flowing sundress, little Claire splashing in a floaty under bright island skies, posts about starting fresh and being thankful for new beginnings. And then, beneath a dinner photo overlooking the ocean, a comment from a friend. "Heard about your mom. I'm so sorry, man." Evan's reply was simple. "Thanks. She's in a better place now." I set the tablet aside and turned toward the window. The sun was slipping behind the trees, painting everything gold. And in that moment, for the first time since the nightmare began, a quiet smile touched my face. The man who thought he could erase me, steal my life, and drive into the sunset with my money was about to rediscover something he'd forgotten long ago, that his mother was not someone to underestimate. I used to believe betrayal always arrived like a storm, with shouting, slammed doors, maybe shattered glass. When betrayal finally came for me, it didn't arrive with shouting or shattered glass. It crept in quietly, hidden beneath polite bureaucracy and cheerful automated voices. It lived inside stamped forms and digital records, moving so softly that by the time I noticed, my identity had already been erased, reduced to a line crossed out somewhere deep inside a computer system. This kind of treachery doesn't roar, it murmurs. It murmurs through paperwork and forged signatures, through the faint tapping of keys as someone rewrites your existence while you're too weak to lift your head. After reading Evan's message and seeing those photos of him basking in the sun with his wife and little girl, I knew I couldn't stay frozen in disbelief any longer. I needed evidence, something tangible to confirm the truth that my heart already knew, because no mother ever wants to accept that her own child could treat her as if she were disposable. So the next morning, with hands still trembling from anesthesia, I picked up my phone and dialed the county clerk's office. I forced my voice steady, pretending to be just another caller making a routine request, as I asked, almost absurdly, for a certified copy of my own death certificate. At first, the woman on the other end sounded puzzled, even amused, assuming I'd made some mistake or was handling matters for someone else. But when I gave her my full name, birth date, and social security number, and told her I was calling from a recovery facility, alive, everything changed. Silence filled the line, heavy and electric. Then she asked me to hold. The wait stretched endlessly before another voice joined the call. Older, steadier, cautious. It was the kind of tone that prepares you for bad news. She spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it might bruise. Yes, she confirmed, there was indeed a death certificate for a Margaret Louise Hill, issued 2 weeks earlier. Cause of death. Complications from surgery. It had been properly notarized and signed by a physician, a name I had never encountered before in my entire life. She couldn't share the full document, she explained. Policy forbade it, but she did confirm one thing. The next of kin listed, the person who had filed and signed for the certificate, was Evan Hill. It's strange how quickly the body can turn to ice even under sunlight. I was sitting there, wrapped in a soft blanket, the breeze from the open window carrying the scent of spring, yet every bit of warmth drained from me. The phone in my hand suddenly felt heavy and foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I somehow managed to thank her, keeping my tone even, and asked whether I could request a copy. She said it would be mailed to the address on record. When I pressed for that address, she hesitated, then told me gently that she wasn't authorized to reveal that information by phone. She didn't have to. I already knew exactly where it would go. To Evan's house, the place that now represented my so-called final address. When I ended the call, there were no tears, no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when the foundation of your life quietly gives way. The silence in that little room filled all the spaces that used to be held together by love and certainty. In that moment, the reality became undeniable. Evan hadn't merely tampered with insurance papers. He had officially declared me dead before the state. Without hesitation, without remorse, without even the courtesy of a goodbye. And somehow I knew this wasn't the end of what he'd done. Determined to uncover more, I asked one of the younger nurses, Alicia, the kind girl who always brought me ginger tea in the afternoons, if she could help me make a call. I still remembered my old neighbor Patty's number by heart. She was old-fashioned, refused to give up her landline, always saying the signal was more dependable. Patty and I had spent countless afternoons chatting on our porches about everything. The birds, the weather, politics, even the best way to keep tomato plants upright during summer storms. We hadn't spoken in months, but the instant she heard my voice on the other end of the line, she screamed like she'd just heard a ghost. And in a way, I suppose she had. She began to cry before I could even finish my greeting, her voice breaking between sobs as she told me that everyone in the neighborhood believed I was gone. Evan, she said, had hosted a small memorial in their backyard, quiet, private, the way he claimed I would have wanted it. No ceremony, no crowd, just a simple farewell. Patty confessed that she'd sent flowers, baked a casserole, and spent days in mourning. When I told her I was alive, recovering, very much still here, she fell silent for a few seconds before whispering that it had to be a joke. I asked whether anyone had been to my house. Her voice wavered. Evan had emptied it just the week before. He'd told everyone he was managing the estate, that I'd left everything to him in my will. She'd seen the trucks outside, the movers carrying out boxes and furniture, room by room, until nothing was left. My shelves, my linens, my garden tools, gone. My photographs, my books, gone. And when she said those words, your will, something inside me broke, but not with rage. It was a clean, quiet fracture, the kind that leaves you hollow and painfully aware, because this wasn't just about forged papers or stolen money anymore. He had dismantled my entire life, piece by piece, and rebuilt it for himself. He had taken the shawl my mother crocheted when I became a mother myself. He had packed away the little tin box filled with handwritten family recipes, the ones smudged with butter and thyme from decades of Sunday dinners. He had taken the bundle of letters from my late husband, their edges softened from years of being unfolded and refolded. He even took the black and white photograph of me standing barefoot in my grandmother's yard, smiling at a sun that seemed to promise everything ahead. He stole every trace of who I was. And then he boarded a plane with his wife and child, raising a glass to their new life while I was left behind, buried alive in silence. But I didn't waste away. I inhaled, I blinked, I existed. And in that moment, lying in a bed that felt more like a war zone than a recovery room, I made myself a promise. I would not disappear. This would not be the final chapter of my story. If my son wanted a dead mother so desperately, then he was about to learn what happens when the ghost refuses to stay buried. No more trust, no more waiting, no more quiet compliance. I would uncover every document, every forged signature, every falsehood he had built his shiny new life upon, and I would dismantle it piece by piece until the truth stood bare. He had written me off as gone, but I was still here, and I was just beginning. The moment I chose to stop being the victim didn't come with fanfare or fury. No courtroom speeches, no shattered mirrors, no melodramatic epiphany. It happened quietly, on a muted gray afternoon, while rain tapped gently on the window and the faint smell of stale coffee drifted from the hallway. I sat there with a notepad balanced on my lap, a cheap pen trembling between fingers still weak from surgery, and began to think like the woman I had been long before Evan was born. I wasn't plotting revenge, not the cinematic kind at least. I was preparing for something much simpler, much truer, reality, the kind fought with patience, persistence, and paperwork. Evan had forgotten that his mother wasn't just a name on a birth certificate. I was a woman who'd spent a lifetime managing bills, keeping receipts, filing taxes, asking the right questions, and getting people to listen when it mattered. So I began there. I wrote down everything I could remember, every date, every unsettling moment, every clue that might seem trivial to anyone else, but told the story of how my life had been stolen. The night the pills hit too hard, the last time Evan came to visit, the day my debit card stopped working and my email went silent. I made a list of every institution that had quietly declared me gone. The insurance company, the bank, the government office that stamped the papers. I began listing names, dates, exact phrases, because words have weight, and I'd learned that the smallest detail could pry open a lie. I didn't yet know what shape my plan would take, only that it needed to be built on something solid, the truth. Next, I asked Alicia, the nurse who'd helped me call Patty, if she could print something for me. She didn't pry, just smiled kindly and handed me the hospital's old iPad. I searched for local legal aid offices, scrolling past the big firms with glossy websites and slogans that rang hollow, until I found a modest one with a simple tagline, "Protecting the Forgotten." That was all I needed to see. I called the number, expecting a voicemail or a curt receptionist, but an older woman answered on the third ring. Her voice was steady and warm, the kind that makes you exhale without realizing it. I told her my situation. Not the whole story, just enough to make her listen. When I mentioned that my son had filed a false death certificate, she didn't laugh, didn't sound doubtful. Instead, she asked quietly, "And where are you calling from, Mrs. Hill?" I gave her the name of the recovery center. There was a pause, then she said, "Would you be willing to meet with someone in person?" I explained that travel wasn't an option yet, not with stitches still pulling at my side. "That's all right," she replied. "We can come to you." 2 days later, a woman named Diane arrived. She wore a soft gray cardigan and carried a leather folder so worn at the corners it looked like it had weathered decades of stories. Her hair was cut short in silver, her gaze calm but alert, taking in everything. She didn't hurry me. She simply sat beside my bed, opened a yellow legal pad and said, "Start wherever you want." So I did. I told her everything, slowly, deliberately, my voice cracking here and there when the pain rose too close to the surface. I didn't spare the ugly parts. I spoke of the bank, the insurance forms, the missing mail, the empty house. I even told her about the message on my phone, and she asked gently if she could photograph it for her file. When I finally stopped, bracing myself for disbelief or the soft sympathy I dreaded most, Diane simply looked at me, pen still poised above the page, and said something that shifted everything inside me. "You're not the first." It turned out that fabricated death claims weren't rare at all. Diane explained that cases like mine appeared more often than people realized, especially when large insurance policies and trusted relatives were involved. What Evan had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. Filing a false death certificate was already a felony, she said, and when you added a forged notary seal, falsified addresses, and stolen financial access, it became a tower of offenses that could put someone behind bars for years. The real challenge, she told me, was proving that I was who I claimed to be, not to her, but to the systems that had erased me. For that, we needed proof, pages and pages of it. We began assembling every record we could reach. Diane submitted formal requests for the death certificate, the insurance payout paperwork, and the bank's transaction history. She warned me that most institutions wouldn't release a thing until they were convinced I was alive. So she arranged for the facility's director to sign an affidavit verifying my identity and current medical condition, witnessed by another staff member. Then we photographed me holding my driver's license and my birth certificate, both fortunately stored as digital copies on my phone, thanks to a social worker who had scanned them when I applied for Medicare. Diane also filed what she called an identity reclamation claim with the Social Security Administration, a slow but necessary step if I ever wanted my benefits or legal status restored. The process was exhausting, but Diane handled it with calm precision, deliberate, organized, yet always human. She reminded me of the women I'd known in the 1970s, the ones who quietly kept entire offices and families running while no one ever thought to thank them. Then, something unexpected happened. After dinner one evening, there was a gentle knock at my door. Brenda, one of the older nurses who had been working at the facility for nearly 10 years, slipped inside with a hesitant look. She said she'd overheard bits of my conversation with Diane earlier, and for a moment I thought she was going to reprimand me for discussing legal issues in public. Instead, she closed the door softly and said, "Something like that happened to my aunt." Her voice trembled slightly as she went on. Her daughter drained her accounts and left her in a state home. People don't talk about it much, but it happens more often than you'd think. She told me that if I needed anything, paperwork, witnesses, medication logs, she'd help. Brenda had seen Evan coming and going during those first few days after my surgery. She remembered the things he said, the items he carried away. She even recalled the night the pills had hit me too hard. "You were completely out," she whispered. I remember thinking something wasn't right. From that day on, Brenda became my quiet ally. She handed Diane copies of visitor records, medication charts, and even a form to request the facility's security footage. Every detail began to fall into place, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Evan had been setting this up from the very beginning. The day I was admitted, he saw an opening in my vulnerability, the perfect storm of surgery, sedation, and trust, and he exploited it. But what he hadn't expected was that I'd wake up, not just from the drugs, but from the long sleep of blind faith and silence I'd lived in for years. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I had evidence. I had purpose. For most of my life, I'd believed that when everything collapses, it's the people you love who will help you rebuild. The family you nurtured. The ones you gave your best years to. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the hands that reach out belong to strangers, quiet souls who've been watching from the edges, waiting for the right moment to step in. You don't always notice it at first, but their kindness becomes something sturdier than the trust you lost. That's how it felt the afternoon Diane introduced me to Miriam. Miriam worked for the insurance company, the very same one that had issued the payout on my so-called death. She wasn't an executive or a manager, just a mid-level account verification officer at the regional branch, but she'd seen my name before. When Diane submitted formal requests for the claim paperwork and verification records, it was Miriam who spotted that something didn't sit right. She'd been the one to process the original claim when Evan filed it, and she remembered it clearly because the timeline hadn't made sense. The death certificate had been received before the hospital had even updated its discharge list. Miriam said she'd flagged it internally, a quiet note in the system, but the claim went through anyway. He had everything in order, she told Diane. It all looked legitimate, until now. Diane asked if she'd be willing to meet me. At first, Miriam refused. Company policy, confidentiality, potential legal trouble. But 2 days later, she changed her mind. She showed up at the facility on her day off, wearing jeans and a navy raincoat, holding a small bakery box like she was visiting an old friend. She looked to be in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her eyes warm but weary. She shook my hand with quiet sincerity and said softly, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." I couldn't find words, so I just nodded. She sat down beside my bed, set the pastry box on the table between us, opened a folder, and began tapping her fingers against it nervously. Then she said she wasn't supposed to be there, not off the record, not without authorization. But my case had stayed in her mind ever since it crossed her desk. When she saw Diane's name on the request, she recognized it from a training seminar years earlier. Diane's the kind of woman who doesn't knock unless she plans to push the door open, Miriam said with a small, knowing smile. She couldn't hand over official files, but she told us what she could recall. Evan had filed the claim using a notarized death certificate and a signed statement naming himself as the sole beneficiary. The payout had been approved in just 5 days. Unusually fast, she said, almost as if someone wanted it processed before anyone had time to look too closely. He'd submitted an email address under my name, one the company had never seen before. Every document had been signed digitally, no ink, no voice, no human verification. "It's a loophole," Miriam said quietly. "The system doesn't see faces, only boxes checked." But what she showed me next was what truly hollowed me out. She pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, and turned the screen toward me. On her personal social media feed was a public post from Evan. "We miss you every day, Mom. Your legacy means the world to us. You gave us this fresh start." Beneath it was a picture of a new house, 2 stories, fresh paint, a white picket fence gleaming in the sun, and a caption that read, "Built on love and blessings." That word, blessings, hit me harder than anything else. It felt like being struck in the face by something you once cherished. Miriam looked at me with quiet sadness. "He didn't just take your money," she said. "He turned you into a story, a prop for his happy ending." I felt the sting behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. He'd taken too much already. I wouldn't give him that too. So instead, I asked, "Is there any way to undo what he's done?" She hesitated before answering. "Yes," she said finally, "but proving you're alive isn't enough. You'll need to show intent, that he knew exactly what he was doing. It has to be deliberate and it has to be public." Public. The word echoed in my head. I wasn't ready for that, and not yet, but I was getting closer. Before leaving, Miriam promised to discreetly notify her supervisor and flag the file for internal fraud review. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start, a spark of motion inside the system that had once stamped me out without a second thought. Then she handed me a folded note. On it, she'd written the internal claim numbers, the digital ID attached to the forged signature, and a private extension where I could reach her directly if anything urgent arose. At the bottom, in small, careful handwriting, she'd added one final line: "Don't let them bury you." After she left, I sat in bed clutching that note like a piece of driftwood in a dark, endless sea. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. For the first time, someone within the system had actually seen me. Not as a file number or a clerical anomaly, not as a phantom hovering between life and paperwork, but as a living woman who still had something to say. And I intended to use that voice. There's a peculiar feeling that comes when you decide to stop hiding. You think courage will feel triumphant, maybe even cinematic. But at first, it just feels like exposure, like stepping into a cold wind without your coat, realizing how long you've been protecting yourself only once the chill hits your skin. You start wondering who looks at you and sees a survivor and who still sees a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was Margaret Hill, 67 years old, legally alive, emotionally battered, and more resolute than I had ever been. With Diane's guidance, we built a thick, tangible record of my existence. A folder stuffed with notarized forms, photographs, hospital reports, signed witness statements, and a handwritten letter from me explaining, in my own words, exactly what had been done and what I intended to do about it. It was more than documentation. It was testimony. My voice pressed into paper and sealed in ink. We mailed one copy to the insurance company's fraud division and hand-delivered another to the police station downtown. Diane warned me not to expect miracles. Investigations like this often moved slower than grief itself, taking weeks, sometimes months. Still, as I watched that envelope disappear into the system that had once declared me gone, I felt something shift, like I'd stepped out of the grave Evan had dug for me and planted my own name back in the light. But fate doesn't like to make things simple. A few days later, the phone rang. The caller identified himself as Miriam's supervisor. His tone clipped, bureaucratic, unreadable. He explained that the company needed to confirm my identity in person and requested that I appear at their downtown office for what he called an identity audit. I hesitated. The thought of entering the same building that had already pronounced me dead made my stomach twist. But Diane insisted it was progress, proof that the wheels of the internal review were turning. So I agreed. She wheeled me in herself that morning, my body still weak, my steps uncertain, dressed in my nicest blouse and soft gray pants. I'd combed my hair neatly, and I held my ID in my hand like it was a boarding pass back into the land of the living. The office loomed tall and impersonal, all steel, glass, and professional smiles that never quite reached the eyes. They escorted us into a conference room lined with mirrored panels. A man in a dark suit waited inside, sitting behind a laptop, a small camera positioned beside him, his smile thin and practiced. The audit began. They photographed me from every angle, compared signatures, recorded my voice, asked questions about my history, my addresses, family details, medical information. I answered steadily even as my hands trembled. Diane stayed beside me, her calm presence anchoring me when my nerves threatened to shake me apart. And then, just as the technician finished scanning my fingerprints, the door opened. Another man entered, younger, brisk, with a badge clipped to his belt and a phone pressed to his palm. He stopped mid-step when he saw me, frowned, and said something that froze the room. "We just got a fraud alert from Evan Hill," he said. "He's reporting that someone is impersonating his deceased mother." For a moment, the world fell silent. I couldn't feel the air in my lungs. Diane's jaw tightened, her eyes locked on the newcomer. The man in the suit turned toward me, his face unreadable, and asked carefully, "Ma'am, is there any possibility your son doesn't realize you're alive?" I felt the blood drain from my face, but my voice held firm. "He knows," I said evenly. "He knows because he's the one who filed the false claim. He knows because he texted me, telling me to stay quiet. He knows because he took the insurance money, emptied my home, and did it all while I was still recovering from surgery." The man with the badge lifted an eyebrow and asked to see the message. I handed him my phone. He read it once, then again, slower this time, as if making sure every word said exactly what he thought it did. Without a word, he returned the phone and stepped out into the hallway, speaking quietly into his radio. The room went still, too still. No one spoke, not even Diane. I just sat there, staring at the mirrored wall across from me where my reflection stared back, older, worn, but alive. The woman looking back at me wasn't frightened anymore. There was something sharper in her eyes now, something that looked like resolve catching fire. When he came back in, his expression had shifted. He nodded to the man in the suit and said, "She stays. Flag his account. Start a formal case." I exhaled, long and steady, like I'd been holding that breath for years. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was the first time in a long time I felt the world tilt back toward balance. The moment I'd feared, that someone might believe Evan's lie over my truth, had passed. I had faced it head on and didn't disappear, not because I needed to prove my strength, but because I refused to vanish again. That night, back in my room, I sat by the window watching the blur of headlights streak across the road below. Somewhere out there, Evan was still celebrating his new life, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath him had begun to crack. He still thought I was a ghost, a memory best forgotten. But soon he would hear my voice. Soon the whisper would become a roar. There's a strange, quiet satisfaction in watching a lie buckle beneath the truth, especially when that lie was built over your name, your face, your life. It isn't joy, exactly. It's something deeper, steadier, like justice breathing again after being smothered. And despite what people think, this wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I wasn't out to destroy my son. I was trying to undo the version of him that believed his mother could be erased for profit. The first sign that the tide was turning came from the bank. With the fraud investigation underway and Diane's legal filings moving through the system, my financial history began to thaw. A representative from the bank called me directly. No more automated menus, no disconnections. Her tone was soft, deliberate, the way you speak to someone who's been pulled out of the dark. She confirmed what I already suspected. My accounts had been marked deceased and shut down by a designated executor. Evan. He'd transferred nearly $42,000 into a joint account under his and Jenna's names. There were wire confirmations, transfer logs, and internal memos about the final resolution of my estate, all carrying my name, all bearing digital signatures that weren't mine. We're in the process of correcting it, the woman from the bank said gently, but it may take some time to untangle everything. I told her I understood. After everything that had already been taken from me, I could wait a little longer. Then came the mail. With Brenda's help, I filed a request to redirect correspondence back to the facility. Within a few days, envelopes started arriving again, my name printed clearly where it belonged. Bills, bank statements, even a belated birthday card from my church that had wandered through the postal system like a ghost searching for a home. And then there was one envelope that stopped me cold. A notice from an old brokerage account I'd nearly forgotten existed. Evan had submitted a liquidation request just 3 days after my supposed death, withdrawing nearly $11,000 and transferring it into an account labeled Claire's Future. That detail almost made me laugh, not from amusement but from disbelief. My granddaughter's future built on her grandmother's false death. The digital trail was surprisingly easy to follow. Every forged signature, every transfer, every login left a fingerprint. Diane hunted each one down with relentless precision, filing motions, submitting subpoenas, and even looping in a contact at the district attorney's office to accelerate the review. "This is the kind of case no one wants to touch," she told me one afternoon as we sat together in the sunroom beside my ward, the late light filtering through the glass, because it's not about criminals or strangers. It's about family. And as her words settled between us, I felt a realization I hadn't been ready to face before. Evan didn't believe he had done anything truly wrong. He believed he had merely taken what was already owed to him, skipping the difficult parts, avoiding the discomfort of watching me age or hearing me ask for help. In his mind, I wasn't a victim. I was a loose end neatly tied off with forged documents and a convenient story about loss. To him, this wasn't theft. It was management. He thought he'd handled things. But now he would have to explain. It began quietly. A letter from the insurance company addressed to his home, notifying him that his account had been flagged for irregular activity and requesting additional verification. Then came the knock on his door. Not the police, not yet, but an investigator from the company's internal fraud division. Enough to make the air in his perfect house feel a little thinner, the walls a little closer. Miriam kept me updated when she could, careful with her words. She said his tone in emails had shifted, clipped, uncertain. He'd begun asking questions instead of making confident statements. Is this claim under review? Was there new information? She didn't answer directly. She let the silence work on him. And then something shifted online. His posts began to vanish. The beach photos disappeared. The chirpy hashtags about fresh starts and gratitude stopped. The shiny updates about the car and the white picket fence house went quiet. The last thing visible before he locked his account was a short, uneasy message. Sometimes life hits back when you least expect it. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea warming my hands and thought about all the times I'd chosen silence. The arguments I'd swallowed when he lashed out in his 20s, the forgotten birthdays, the excuses for small lies and borrowed money. How many times I'd told myself he was just tired, just under pressure, just trying. But sitting there, I understood. Evan hadn't suddenly become capable of betrayal. He had been rehearsing it for years. This was simply the first time he made it official. I wasn't a memory anymore, frozen in a framed photo. I was flesh and breath and willpower, and I was coming for everything he'd taken. There's a moment after the worst part of any storm when the air shifts. The clouds haven't cleared, but the wind eases and you can finally see what's left standing. That's how it felt when the investigator called to tell me that formal charges had been filed. It wasn't joy that filled me. It was something quieter, deeper, the steady calm of truth reclaiming its place. It wasn't revenge that washed over me. It was something older, steadier. The quiet weight of justice finally standing tall after being buried for far too long. Evan had been arrested on charges of insurance fraud, identity theft, and falsifying official documents. There was no dramatic scene, no flashing lights or handcuffs at dawn. It happened quietly. They asked him to come in for questioning, and he simply didn't walk back out. When I first heard the words "he's in custody," I didn't feel triumph. I waited for the rush, that satisfying flicker of he got what he deserved, but it never came. Instead, there was only a long, steady breath, like releasing years of held air. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt real again. The investigation laid everything bare. He had used my hospital files to forge official documents, created a fraudulent email under my name, and diverted funds into several accounts, some his, some Jenna's, one disguised as a trust fund for Claire. They reconstructed the timeline, matched the forged signatures to his handwriting, compared the false documents against verified medical and financial records. The truth wasn't just visible anymore, it was irrefutable. At first, he tried to talk his way through it, said it was confusion, that he'd thought I was dying, that he'd only been preparing. Claimed it was a mistake born of love and panic. But the text message he'd sent me, the bank transfers, the photos of him celebrating his loss, they told the real story, the complete story. And this time, no one could edit me out of it. As for Jenna, she said she hadn't known. Maybe that was true. I didn't press. That was no longer mine to untangle. I'd spent too much of my life trying to soften other people's betrayals by imagining they hadn't meant to hurt me. I wasn't doing that anymore. The insurance payout was reversed. The accounts were frozen, pending restitution. The bank sent me a formal apology and restored every account in my name. My Social Security benefits, my investments, my medical records, all reinstated. But what mattered most wasn't the paperwork. It was the return of something far more personal. My name, my place, my voice. I was Margaret Hill again. Not a file, not a ghost, but a woman who existed. 3 weeks later, when I was finally discharged from the recovery facility, the afternoon sun was warm on my face. A nurse wheeled me to the entrance and handed me a small envelope, a goodbye card signed by the staff. Inside, on a separate folded slip of paper, was a note from Brenda, written in careful, looping cursive. They forgot you were still here. You reminded them. I moved into a modest little house just beyond the city. Nothing fancy, just enough space for one person and a patch of soil. I planted tomatoes like I used to, bought myself a rocking chair, a bright new tea kettle, small comforts that felt like reclamation. I rejoined my old book club. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I started filling my days with things that had nothing to do with him. People sometimes ask if I've spoken to Evan since the arrest. I haven't, and I won't. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not the same as permission. You can release the weight of pain without handing it the keys to your life. I can grieve the boy I raised without welcoming the man he became back into my home. I share my story not for pity nor for spectacle, but because I've since met others, women like me, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, who were pushed aside, talked over, quietly erased until they began to fade from their own reflection. But we're still here. We are not invisible. We are not fragile, and we do not vanish softly. My name is Margaret Hill. I am 67 years old. I am both legally and spiritually alive, whole, present, and unbroken. And I belong to no one's grave, no one's silence, no one's shadow. I am no one's ghost.